Hey everyone! If you're a fan of the show, please head over to mikeyop.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's MIKEYOPP.com. Thanks!
Hi, I'm Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening to Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. This week, coming to us from New Zealand, is Mr. Alan Cox. How you doing, Alan?
I'm doing really good, thank you. Ready to face the day, which is awesome.
Awesome, very cool. Yeah, and you are a jack of all trades, and you have an incredible product out there, but you're also like a mentally cognizant, really interesting person, so I'm excited to kind of dive into things. The first question we always ask our guests is standard, and we just ask you to let us know how old you are, where you grew up, and what generation, if any, you believe you belong to.
So I'm in my early 50s. I grew up in the UK, now live in New Zealand. I'm not sure what generation I am. I don't really pay much attention to that, but generation getting old, I think.
All right. Well, I'm in your same one, and that's a perfectly acceptable answer. Great. So I think the next question I just want to ask you is because of your bio, you said that you faced setbacks after setbacks, and you eventually hit rock bottom multiple times, which I love. I thought that was an interesting way to put it. So kind of can you start with now with what you're all about, and then work us backwards a little bit if you can.
So I guess in the broader sense, what I'm all about now is I've dedicated my life from here on, or at least in the kind of foreseeable future, to improve the kind of the global standard for mental well-being and mental health. I think there's a big job to be done in, improving everyone's well-being and also shifting the conversation around mental health. I think generally the term mental health is kind of synonymous with poor mental health, whereas it really needs to shift to something that's far more normalized, and mental health is something that everyone should work on, just like their physical fitness. And there's a lot of gains to be made from doing that. So that's really what I've set out to do. And so I do a lot of talking things like this to try and kind of get that message out. And I'm also a founder of a startup which is tackling a big problem in the mental health app space. It might surprise you to know that there's thousands of mental well-being apps available to us, but there's very little evidence that any of them actually work. And this was something that certainly I experienced when I was going through some of my troubles, trying these apps that have been recommended to me, only to find that they just didn't do anything for me. So the product is called Everyellow, and so that's keeping me very busy.
Well, and can you get a little bit into like the actual products?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the reason why most apps just don't work is that people just don't want to engage with them. Incredibly, like 98% plus are deleted within the first 15 days. And you have to ask, well, why is that? Well, they're mundane, they're tedious, they're often overly clinical, and they're not enjoyable. So what we've created is an app which takes a pure audio approach. So you just listen. When you listen to Everyellow, we play a personalized stream of audio narrations, vocal narrations that help you basically creates small but significant shifts in your mindset. And those narrations are overlaid on top of a backdrop of music and sound. And yeah, so we've made it incredible. You know, people enjoy using Everyellow. They're noticing, you know, quite significant changes quite quickly. They're sharing it with their friends and family, and they really like the fact that they can use it in pretty much any situation. You can even dial down the voice so that it's kind of non-intrusive, so that you can use it while you can listen to Everyellow while you're working or studying, but the voices are kind of still getting through at a subconscious level and working on you. It's we're very, very pleased with the results it's getting.
That's awesome. Yeah, and then I kind of asked you like 6 questions at once at the beginning, so I can slow things down now. But that's terrific, seriously. And I really do groove with what you're talking about. I think there's something to be said for listening and having that work and calm you down. And I'm not a huge fan of the interactive stuff, so I definitely think you're spot on with all that. But kind of to get us to like where you would care enough about other people to help them. And I know that's a rude thing to suggest, but most people aren't really looking to help other people, and the people who are, I find, usually suffered some sort of personal tragedy. And so you alluded to a lot of different struggles in your life. Why don't you just give us whatever version of the story you think is the most prominent and effective to help people understand you?
Yeah, well, I guess my trouble started from a very, very early age when putting it bluntly, it was quite an abusive and traumatic childhood. And so while you're at an age when you really need love and care, I didn't really have a lot of that, and obviously that shapes you as you move forward. And bullying in schools, lots of periods of depression. At times, when some reasonably big life events happen, maybe not massive, but losing a job or something like that, that would often throw me into a very deep, dark space. There have been some times that kind of, were pretty serious. So there was one time where I had quite a serious back injury, and I was unable to walk for pretty much a year, and that derailed all of my kind of plans and of what I wanted to do over the next 5 years, and that led to multiple suicide attempts, and that again from then I kind of recovered somewhat, but never really. The next big episode was when I nearly got killed in the Canterbury earthquakes, and then shortly after that I lost my business, and that really was the straw that broke the camel's back. I had a major mental breakdown, and it's until I had this, I had no idea really. I just thought a mental breakdown meant that you was depressed, but it is a proper kind of breakdown of the system. Your brain kind of shuts down all of the a lot of the non-essential things, so it can kind of focus on recovery. And what that meant for me is that I couldn't walk very far. My speech was slurred, like it felt like I'd had a stroke, to be honest. I was told that because of the severity of that, I need. I shouldn't even think about getting back to work for at least a year. That's kind of the length of time it would typically take for someone in my condition. But that's really where I kind of started turning things around. I kind of couldn't face that. I started, consuming content on YouTube. Really, I think I got to a stage where I thought, if I don't do something here, I'm not going to be around for my children. Right? It was simple as that. So I started to try and understand what was going on, so I could try and find a pathway to like proper recovery. And I think kind of coming to your point about why am I caring? I think there is a component of helping those that are suffering, but I think there's actually a much bigger component of when I got on this path of recovery, I didn't just go back to like what I'd call like the normal state that I'd been before. I actually found I suppose my analogy, although I've never been a fitness junkie, if you can imagine, fitness junkies getting like high on like, the adrenaline and everything they get from that. I started really seeing the power that mental fitness gives you. So I just carried on in my journey, and I would now consider myself far more mentally fit than the average person, and that creates an enormous amount of kind of benefit to not only you as a person, but to those around you. And I guess because I've always been an entrepreneur, I really see the upside of that. It's and that's why I'm on this mission of it's not just about avoiding poor mental health. You can actually get much more out of life by working on it. So just one simple example is that before this time, me and my wife, we was always kind of, we loved each other, but we was always like knocking heads. And but since I'm now in a better space, our relationship is really blooming, and that's just one example of what being mentally fit does for you.
No, that's great. So I think to clarify for our audience, because I think I have a good idea, but I want to make sure. When you say like you're mentally fit and you're probably mentally fit better than a lot of other people, and that's not bragging to me, that's just you saying like you've been trying these tools and they're working. But would that mean that like nothing is too hard for anyone to overcome if you're mentally fit enough? Or is there like an actual, in your head, like an index where like, okay, well that would be over the top? And I'll give you a specific example that I think will help make my question more clear. It's one thing to lose a job. It's another to get told you have like cancer. And then it's a whole nother to like lose a child, for example. Would you say that mental health, if you're truly mentally healthy, can prepare you for any of these brutal examples?
So I think overall the answer is yes, but like losing a loved one as an example, grief isn't like stress or depression. That is a totally normal and expected response that you have. So I wouldn't. But things like losing your job and even having a terrible accident where like you can't walk anymore or something. That there's yes, definitely mental fitness will enable you to kind of take charge of that situation much quicker. The impact it will have on yourself will be minimized, and your ability to bounce back quicker will be increased. There's kind of an important distinction like that I need to make that's it's not really well understood in the general public, and that there's mental illness and mental health are kind of on two different axes, right? I'm like, so as an example, you can have someone with a mental illness, like say schizophrenia or something like that, but they can be, generally speaking, they can be perfectly mentally healthy, right? That they are two different things. And, similarly, you can have somebody that's not got a kind of a proper mental illness as such, but they are mentally unwell. So, what I'm talking about here is general mental health and well-being. I'm not talking about any specific mental illnesses. Where kind of mental health and mental illness kind of blur into one is when we start talking about things like PTSD, depression, anxiety disorders, things like that, because those things are definitely things that I believe that you can recover from, and they are usually linked to some kind of unhealthy background that you've had to kind of go through in your life.
Yeah, no, these are great answers, and I really like what you said about grief not being the same as I think you said guilt and depression. That's a really good line to draw. I want to switch gears a little bit because the point of this podcast is to talk about how our opinions of mortality affect the way we live, and you've talked a lot about how your actual life affected the way you're currently living and how it led to mental health. But you did mention, one of the hardest topics to talk about, but I think one of the most important topics to talk about, which is suicide. And so you did say you had a few suicide attempts. And so I'm curious not to hear the details of those, but I'm more curious about what was your opinion as you attempted on what would happen to you when you died? And has that opinion changed at all? And if so, what is your opinion now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so just I guess first, just to give a bit of context to my answer, is that I kind of got forced through a career in my early days. I got forced through an education path. I'm naturally a creative person, and I kind of got pushed into engineering. So I've got this weird brain where I look at things quite holistically, but I also look at things from a scientific lens as well. And so I guess at the time, the truth of the matter is, I don't think. I mean, it's certainly the case for me that I don't think I really wanted to kind of die as such. I think it was more that I just could not go on with the pain that I was going through. And when you're in that situation, you simply don't rationalize properly the outcomes of what your action can take. In the kind of cold light of day, so to speak, I'm incredibly grateful that kind of I wasn't successful. I came very close a couple of times. The thought process at the time, especially when, there's alcohol involved and things like that, what can happen, and I think I'm not unusual here, but you're in this incredibly deep depression. You just cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel. You're just in this complete black cloud situation you start thinking to yourself, I just don't want to do this, and then you then start drinking heavily to kind of just numb your kind of thought processes, kind of thing, and the next minute you've taken action that you wish you hadn't taken, right? So that was kind of the first part of the question. What was the second part of the question?
Yeah, so no, that was, again, great answers. I'm really, really thrilled. So I the main question we always ask in our podcast is, what do you actually think will happen when you die? So I guess I want to ask it just like that and just that directly.
This is where kind of the scientific brain comes in, kind of thing, and also the spiritual brain as well, is that, first of all, I wouldn't say I believe anything in particular happens, because I don't think it's possible to know. But what I do have a sense of is, because I've read a lot of things about, things like Buddhism and things like that, and I'm seeing that there's more and more potential that there's kind of a universal consciousness that we all kind of belong to, and I think actually we are potentially, right, and this is where I say I can't say this is what I believe, but I think there's a high degree of potential that we are actually part of that just as much when we're alive as when we die. I use the analogy of like, say, a radio signal, right? If you like, I know it might sound crazy, but we've just put this James Webb telescope up into the sky, right? And what that is doing is listening out for signals from billions of years ago, right? Well, what has that got to do with us now, right? Well, we are, in our brains, we're working on electrical signals, and they don't, when they don't just stop at our skull, right? They are measurable, even at a tiny amount, they are immeasurable outside. And they just it's not credible that they just disappear to nothing, because that's not the way physics works, right? And we're learning so many new things that we would never have even thought possible. Things with like quantum physics and things like that. There's things in quantum physics that just cannot be explained, right? So just having an open mind, you have to think, well, just based on what you know about the basics of physics, it's quite credible that, in a manner of speaking, this thing, some people call God is potentially a universal consciousness that we are all part of, and I using that potentiality, that's really kind of, that's been a big influence on how I live my life now. And just coming back to your thing about suicide, for example, what I would say to people now, and this is the case with me. The reason that I would not even think about it now is that I'm actually really scared of what might be the case when you know, let's just say when you go to the other side, right? Who bloody knows that who knows that the rules of the universe are, right? You know, just to kind of be a bit joking for a moment, you know, it could be that there is a rule of the universe that says, you know, if you didn't, you know, honor your life enough to the extent that you, you know, took that away, then you must come back as a, you know, a grub, and you know your own function in life. You know, you got to spend 1,000 lifetimes as a worm before you're ever allowed to be a human again. You know, and we just don't know what the rules are.
What you just said, I think, is what all of us kind of inherently and intuitively think, which is like, I feel like I got this, and so I think that's really interesting. I think that's fascinating to think about, like what you said, the threat of quote unquote the rules of the universe if we don't know what they are. Because you grew up in the UK and you now live in New Zealand, and I'm sure you have some familiarity with America, do you think all of these English-speaking cultures are pretty much the same when it comes to mental health, or do you think one of them is like taking the lead? Where do you kind of see like the mental health meets cultural nexus?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it. First of all, let's look at the general, you know, the people population, and then we look at the world of like business and governments, right? At a more of a human level, in the English-speaking world, my you know, just based on what I know, I believe that in the USA it's kind of more advanced in accepting that mental health is something that you can work on, right? Like, you know, my understanding is that it would be far more normal in the USA for, you know, two guys or two women to be over coffee and saying, "Oh, look, I must go now. I'm off to see my psychologist, or I'm off to see my whatever." Whereas in the UK and here in New Zealand, you definitely wouldn't say that. You know, that's something you would keep under your hat. It would definitely be, yeah, you. That's not something at all. And there's a lot of talk at the moment around, you know, like the Great Resignation, and you know, the increased problems around mental well-being as a result of COVID, and how this has changed the environment for employers. So here, you know, again, it's my general understanding that in the USA, they lead the world in particular the OECD countries. They lead the world in kind of the what weight and spend they give to employee well-being. And at first sight, that sounds great, and it is great, but when you look at, well, why are they doing that? It's not for the reasons that you would expect. It's to reduce their insurance premiums. It's to reduce the potentiality for claims like legal claims and that kind of thing. And I've also heard that there's kind of a bit of, I think it's what you call optics, kind of bragging rights, to say like, "Oh yeah, at our company we do this, we do that. You know, what do you do?" Yeah, but I'm not. You know, and again, I don't know this firsthand, but from what I've heard from, you know, other consultants overseas, is that it's not really like a genuine desire to improve the well-being of your people, for the right reasons. It's more for those other reasons. But having said that, even if the reasons aren't entirely, noble, it's still good that it's happening more than anywhere else. Whereas in New Zealand, for example, we're pretty much bottom of the pack. Here we've got two kind of characteristics that really don't lend themselves well to this kind of thing. One is I think it's more of like an Australian saying, but it's kind of you might have heard the phrase like "she'll be right." It's kind of like, oh, it'll be okay, right? Like kind of sweep it under the carpet, right? I'm sure it's going to be fine. And then on top of that, you've got this what we call number 8 fence wire mentality, which basically means Kiwis prefer to do. They think they can do things themselves, even though there's other people that can do it 100 times better. So I think because of those two things, it's really not given much attention.
Well, thank you so much, Alan Cox, for putting another nail in the coffin today. This has been another episode of Coffin Talk, and we are always proud to offer you people from all over the world. So it was especially fun today to have someone from New Zealand and originally from the UK. Being an American, I don't know how much people are not talking about mental health. I just know that it comes up a lot, but it doesn't sound practical, and no one I've ever heard in my life has talked about how you should mentally train the way you physically train and work out. So I love your approach to all that, and I'm definitely a fan. Of course, in our notes for our listeners, we'll encourage everyone to check out your product and your bio and your page. And for those of you listening at home, if you want to support us, as always, please subscribe and maybe share with a friend and give us a positive rating on Apple if you're listening there. But no matter what, we appreciate you, and this is Mike Oppenheim, and again, you are listening to Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living, and we will see you soon.
Walking alone.